So last week I made a video about what makes a great player, and this week's video was supposed to be about what makes a great DM. However, the more that I thought about it, the more that I realized that so many of the skills that one DM might need to make a good game, another DM might not need at all. And that's just because DMs often are running so many different types of games that the skills that are required for each are just so vastly different. So instead of that, but still keeping in mind the theme of positivity, this video is going to be about the particular skills that I have as a DM that I'm the most proud of. Hopefully, if you have any self-doubt about yourself as a DM, but realize that you do these things also, maybe you'll realize that you're actually a lot better than you are. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into it. The first thing I want to talk about is I love my ability to just create things on the fly. When I first started DMing, I was always very over-preparing for all of my games. I had to know what all the shops were in town, what the shops were selling, how much they sold for, how much was a night at the inn, how much was a drink at the end, what was the name of the innkeeper, what was the name of the regulars, what was the composition of the town's demographics. These were all things I spent just so much time getting into and trying to remember or have a good note for, so if I needed to pull it up, I could. This led to me running more railroady games, where if my party were steering too far off course, I had to really try and push them in because I was too worried about if they did go off course that I wouldn't be prepared for it, that I didn't have something written down on what they're going to do in this exact circumstance. For some DMs, especially those running adventure books, it might be totally fine to do this, if not totally great to do this. Those running adventure books or dungeon crawls, or just really enjoy going really into their world and knowing all the things about it. Like, for an adventure book, you need to make sure that your players are staying on the path of the adventure anyways, so having prepared everything that you know they're going to come across is totally fine. However, when I would do it, I would be preparing all this stuff that very often they would just pass right by because, I mean, how often are they going to go into the weapon shop and ask the weapon shop owner about his wife and kids? But this wasn't the type of game that I wanted to run. What I wanted to run is more of what I would consider the Red Dead method, where there's an open world for them to explore. They can go into the town, do their own quests, make up their own things for them to do. However, there's also stuff that I've made which is a more railroaded section of the game, but as that ends, that opens them back up into the world to do what they want to do. In order to do that effectively, I have to get really good at building my own stuff on the fly. Trying to prepare everything means most likely that my players will come up with something that I couldn't have expected, and then I'm going to get too nervous and not be able to get ready for it. What I want to be able to do is my players suggest something unexpected, and I'm just able to run it as if it's something I'd already prepared. And over the years, I've gotten much better at that. Just a couple of months ago, I ran a game that was 6 hours long. It was actually my first in-person game in 3 years. And this game, I had prepared 2 hours of it, and it was a 6-hour game. I prepared 2 hours of it. And that put me into a situation where 2 hours into the game, the party had done all the stuff that I had prepared, and I just let the story move how it wanted to move. And we ended up doing some really fun stuff because I was confident in myself where if my party were going to give me a suggestion on what they wanted to do, that I could quickly come up with a way for that to be interesting and engaging. And if you aren't good at that and you want to get better at it, the main thing that I can suggest to you is just start doing it. Start putting yourself into situations where you don't have as much prep as you're comfortable with. And the more you do that, the more that firstly, you'll just get better at thinking on the fly. You'll get more comfortable and confident in yourself knowing that you can do it, as well as the more you do it, the more mistakes you're going to make. And the more mistakes you make, the more you're able to understand why you're making these mistakes or what you can be doing to help prevent these mistakes. For example, one thing I struggled with is coming up with character names on the spot. They often end in like Y names. It's often like Holly, Dolly, Billy. And not only does that get confusing, It's always very clear when I'm making up a character name on the spot. So something I started doing is I have a list of names on a piece of paper, so as the game goes on and the party asks what a character's name is, I look down at the piece of paper, pick a name at random, say the name out loud, then cross it out and leave a note next to it saying who that person is so I can go back to it later. As well, allow random tables to be your best friend. You have no idea how useful random tables have been for me as I've tried to create on the fly. In a lot of my games, I tried to overly focus on what made sense as an encounter for this part of the game, or what magic item would be most useful or interesting to my party, but particularly about magic items. As I have given my party just random magic items off of a magic item table, I've realized just how much fun it is to have my party say, oh, I have this item that I'm going to try to use, and me have to try to adapt to that because I never considered using that item in such a context before, and then we get really fun experiences out of items that I might have just tossed away as being non-important or not as cool as a different item. Related to that, some of my favorite moments in D&D as a player have been when we as a party had made choices that had made a clear, direct impact on the world. And as a DM, that's something I'm always trying to achieve. I'm trying to always give my party the feeling that the adventure that they're going on is entirely unique to them because of the decisions that they're making within it. In my current game, one of my players came to me and said that they wanted a character with an Archfey patron, and I had another character come up to me and say they wanted a character with a Shadowfell patron, and I had no intention of the Feywild and the Shadowfell to be these competing forces within my adventure, but just by them making these choices and the context of the story and what I was able to create and build on top of the ideas that they had, that is my central conflict in my current campaign. And this was simply by me playing off of those choices that the players made. In fact, there's going to continue to be more and more choices that they make within the actual game that are going to change this dynamic of these dueling forces, and that's something that I'm really excited to get into, but I'm a little bit afraid to talk about on camera because I'm not sure if anyone in my party actually watches these videos. Part of being able to play off player choices is about being able to do interesting things on the fly. But another part of that is being able to hit the correct emotional beats that make the party feel the correct things about what they've done. It's about knowing what your players expect out of an action and either knowing how to effectively fulfill their expectations or knowing how to effectively subvert their expectations. Which I also really enjoy emotional storytelling. Actual plays have taught us that D&D can be so much more than just going into dungeons and finding treasures. It can be about going across the world and finding friends and the true meaning of love. That was stupid. I'm not putting that in the script. I changed my mind. You see, I've always had a love for telling emotional stories. Ever since I was in high school, I loved giving someone something I had written and being able to tell what part of my writing they were in based off the facial expressions they were making. And that's something I try to continue into my D&D games. I really love it when my players actually feel really powerful emotions about the things that are going on in the story. A lot of my adventures are either going to have really tragic stories that exist underneath the surface of everything that's going on, or there's going to be really tragic events that are happening to the party and around the party. I'm really inspired by stories like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Stories about people who travel and see the world and see what things are like outside of their safe space. And when they come back to it, the things that they have seen and experienced have changed them in a way where the place they come back to isn't the same anymore. The place is still very similar, if not exactly like how it was before, but they have changed so much they can no longer have that same connection to it. So a big theme that I like to include in my adventures is trauma and loss. A lot of my adventures will make a character lose their innocence, or have them have to reflect on their morality, or question who they are as a person. In one of my games, I had an elf character who died. And as you know, elves usually live a really, really long time. But luckily, he was brought back. And after that, when he eventually went home and saw his whole elf family, I made it a very clear point that he couldn't really relate to them in the same way he did before, because elves living 900 plus years basically live in a very immortal way, not worried about how they're going to seize today, more thinking about the next day, the next week, the next month, the next decade, because they can be very, very certain that that's going to exist. For that character though, he knew what it was like to live his last day on Earth. And luckily that ended up not being his last day, but that totally changed his perspective around life, and that affected his ability to talk with his family. Like the cultural thing and kind of totally shifted inside of him. And the reason why that worked is because I didn't force him to have those emotional moments. I kind of threw those ideas at him as things he might be thinking, and then he decided to throw it back at me in that interesting way, which is part of what I also think I'm good at, which is giving my players moments to let their characters shine. I am very aware that there are certain party members who are always going to be trying to stand out more than other party members, and not every party member has to have the same amount of prevalence. You can have one or two characters who slightly show off more because they just naturally lead themselves to showing themselves off. However, that shouldn't mean that the other party members are more like NPCs who just help out in fights and don't really interact with the whole story. They have every right to interact just as much as the other players, but sometimes you have to make sure that you're balancing it right, and it can be a challenge, but that's something I feel like I do pretty well. Now, that previous example was me giving a player the opportunity to show off their character kind of completely on their own. It was them at their family home. It was a whole scene that was dedicated to them figuring out how they feel emotionally about death. And the reason I did that was because this was a character that was new to the campaign, and this was a player who was brand new to D&D. Yes, I killed off a player who was brand new to the game. I don't regret it. But I did that to give them a moment to allow themselves to stand out, to allow themselves to understand that their character can be more than the archetype that they started them out as, that they can develop them into something that means something, that has certain beliefs about the world that they might not necessarily hold. It was to be like, hey, this is what roleplay can be like, have a go at it. But that doesn't mean that every time you're trying to get a certain player to shine, that's what you're going to do. It is easier to try to build moments to allow the party to shine one at a time. However, you don't have to build an adventure arc for each character's backstory one at a time as they go along. You can also build stories that allow the party to show off as a team. On top of that, some players don't want to have a big bad from their past that they have to go and fight. That might just not be the game that they want to be playing. They might want something else out of their character, and you just have to find the ways that they want to explore the game and explore themselves. For example, I've had a player show up at my table before, and they basically gave me nothing to work with. They had their stat block with their class and their race and their character name. They said their character looked how a person of that race and class would look like. And that's all the description I ever got of that character. I've never received character art for that character once. I've never received any backstory for that character. And I've had to really try to push to get anything out of them for what their character is about. This made it quite a struggle for me to try to put them into the game and give them moments, because all the other characters around them were getting really important things. Two of the characters were part of the big overarching plot. There's one character who got a whole side session that was dedicated to him and got really cool magic items out of it. There's another character who got to show off with the extra side stuff they were doing between all of this. And I was stuck with this character who I didn't really know what to do with, because I wasn't really getting anything from them to understand what they wanted. On top of that, it didn't help that they couldn't always make it to sessions, so I always have to build a session around the idea that they probably weren't going to be there, and if they did happen to be there, well then that's just an extra player to help out in the party with the combats. The trick that I ended up doing to make this character feel more interesting is I started to find places where they had to find a way to become part of the party and help out everyone else that's going on. For example, I found out that combat was really easy to do this with, because when it's just the players talking and whatever, it can feel difficult to either get them to speak or to have the other players give them an opportunity to speak. In combat, there's that initiative order where once a round, they have to talk and tell me what's going on. So if I introduce stuff that's directly affecting them, like throwing in monsters that are mainly focused on them and they have to find a creative way around it, or put themselves in a situation in the combat where they are the only ones who can achieve a certain objective to make the fight easier, and therefore they can help the party out by doing that. What I had to accept and work around was that this player did not want to be a main character. However, that doesn't mean they wanted to be a useless side character. So part of what I've been trying to do with them is to try to make them a really, really important side character. This next example isn't even from one of my games. This is from a game that my friend ran that I was a player in. But I found it was actually a really good way to get multiple players to feel like they're really part of the combat, which is to not just have your combats be, oh, there's like one big bad or multiple big bads kind of in a group together that the party are fighting. Because the people who jump up and fight, your barbarians, your paladins, they're all going to get to show off themselves in that moment. But your wizard is going to have to stay in the back and kind of just throw spells, and it isn't going to be as interesting or dangerous for them because they know they have a wall of the paladin and the fighter and the barbarian to protect them. And what my DM did, because I was the wizard in this situation, is that he had a side villain NPC that we also really didn't like show up behind us. And so I, as the wizard and our bard, had to go take on this villain as the rest of the party focused on the main guy. It took me time to realize that not everyone wants to play a whole adventure arc based on their character's backstory. Some people just want to be a cool part of the party and do cool things. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, click that subscribe button to stay updated on future releases. And thank you again. This is the end of the video.